Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I am Michael Shaul, and I am the Treasurer of American Friends of Tel Aviv University. Today's emergency webinar briefing, Iran's War Against Israel, features Professor Meir Litvak, the Director of the Alliance Center for Iranian Studies at Tel Aviv University and a Professor in the Department of Middle Eastern and African History at the university. It is worth noting that the department is recognized worldwide as a leader in the study of the modern Middle East. Professor Litvak is a renowned expert on modern Shiite and Iranian history, as well as on modern Islamic movements and Islamic anti-Semitism. He frequently comments in the media and has written and published and edited several books. He is an alumnus of the Tel Aviv University, where he studied for his undergraduate degree and then earned a PhD from Harvard University. By supporting Tel Aviv University, you are helping to ensure Israel's future. Every dollar, whether designated to research, faculty recruitment, scholarships, or endowment, will help today's students become tomorrow's leaders. Your support now is laying the groundwork for the future, and we must all continue to work together to ensure that Israel's largest university has the resources to continue to change the world. As you know, these are tense and complicated times for Israel. As the threat of war looms, we in the diaspora are often left feeling helpless. We are hopeful that today's webinar will shed light on the roots of the Iranian regime's hatred of Israel. Professor Litvak will discuss what Iran has against Israel and explain the different proxies, including their ideology and relationships to each other, Iran and Israel. Following his presentation, there will be a question and answer session. If you have questions, please write them in the Q&A box, and we will do our best to answer as many as possible. It is my pleasure to turn the program over to Professor Meir Litvak.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. And with your permission, I will share with you the simple PowerPoint presentation that I wrote here. Can you see me or? Okay. Let me start by saying that Iran is unique in its attitude toward Israel today in the modern world. Iran is the only country in the world today that openly, and I will say unequivocally, calls for the elimination of Israel. And these calls for the elimination of Israel are manifested in slogans which you can hear on every Friday, in public prayers, in every rally and public meeting in Iran. Basically, death to Israel, marked by Israel, or Israel must be wiped out. Israel bayad mahshavat. This anti-Israeli position is an integral and central part of the Iranian Islamic regime's ideology. It is shared by all groups within the Iranian ruling elite, including, by the way, current newly elected President Pezeshkian, even though he's not explicit about it, but he, in the past. It is the only issue in which the Islamic Republic of Iran has not compromised since the 1979 revolution. The Islamic government has compromised on many other issues, including foreign relations, economics, social policy, not on Israel. This is the only point in which they've remained loyal to their earliest beliefs. Now, let me say that in order to understand the Iranian government, I should say that the Iranian system or Islamic Republic is a paranoid regime. It is a regime that believes that Iran is threatened by the rest of the world, is surrounded by enemies. The idea of the enemy is central to the ideology of the Islamic Republic. And for instance, Iran's supreme leader, Khamenei, in his many numerous speeches, speaks about the enemy. He mentions the enemy in every lecture, every speech he makes. And in one of his statements, he said, the enemy is eternal and the enemy is everywhere. There's the internal enemy, external enemy. The major enemy that Iran faces is the US and Israel, or Zionism, and also the Iran government believes that every negative thing that happens in Iran is very much a result of enemies' conspiracy. Okay? anti-government protests, and even former President Ahmadinejad even attributed the drought that Iran had suffered as to an Israeli-American conspiracy against Iran. Now, the origins or the foundations of this anti-Israeli policy is rooted in the ideology of Ayatollah Khomeini, the leader of the 1979 revolution, the founder and first leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, Khomeini had been a rabid anti-Semite even as a young scholar from the early 1960s. And in his most important ideological book, The Rule of the Jews, which was published in 1970, already in the first page of this book, he states that Islam had suffered from the Jews from its inception. He spoke about the Jewish war against the Prophet Muhammad, in which the Jews had conspired against the Prophet and tried to foil his divine mission. 3 pages later, when he discusses the modern period, Khomeini says that the Jews have conspired with other groups that were even more satanic than them, that is the West. They've conspired against Islam, and they formed what he calls like a front against Islam. It's a triple front: the Jews, the West, and Westernized Muslims. This, you could say, unholy alliance against Islam regards Islam as its main enemy because the Jews and the West know that Islam, thanks to its noble principles and divine laws, is the major obstacle to their ambitions to take over the world. In addition, the Jews in the West want to prevent Islam from fulfilling its historical destiny to spread all over the world and bring the light of God to the rest of humanity. Khomeini regarded Zionism as the culmination of this Jewish war against Islam and against Iran. As I mentioned already in the 1960s, he spoke about the Jewish threat to Iran, and he regarded Zionism as the convergence point of the 2 wars that the Jews had waged against Islam. In addition, Zionism is the ultimate manifestation of Western imperialist aggression against Islam, where the West has planted the Zionist state in the midst of the Muslim world. And he also believes, or may argue, that the Zionists usurped Palestine from its indigenous Muslim people in order to establish a Jewish state. He therefore regarded the fight against Israel as a religious duty incumbent upon every Muslim in the modern period. Khomeini's successor, the current Iranian leader for the past 30 years, Ayatollah Khamenei, has described Zionism as a diabolic conspiracy, as a Western tool to divide and subjugate the Muslim world. He also described Zionism as the worst moral injustice that had been committed in the 20th century. In his letter to European youth in 2017, he said to them, I want to arouse your attention or consciousness to the threat of Zionism to the Middle East and to the rest of the world. Interestingly, by the way, a study carried out by the Tony Blair Institute in London found out that Israel and Zionism appeared in 40% of Khomeini's speeches, but they've appeared in 90% of Khamenei's speeches. That is, there's almost no speech that he does not speak against Israel. And Khamenei gives usually 2 or 3 speeches every week. Now, the Iranian policy against Israel is not only anti-Zionist, it's also anti-Semitic. And you can see it here, for instance, that when Iran organized a caricature exhibition on the Holocaust, this is the caricature that won first prize. Okay? Taken from Auschwitz, Arbeit macht frei, labor liberates, and put it on, that is what the Israelis do to Al-Aqsa Mosque. And this is no need to explain here, the Jew looking at the mirror and sees Hitler. You can see it another way, is this description of the Jews as being behind every enemy of Iran, of Islam, and of Shia Islam. And again, I don't think this caricature needs any explanation. Another way, by the way, is to Judaize the enemy. That is, when you want to slander someone, you describe him as Jewish. And here, for instance, again, caricatures against the Saudi ruling dynasty, former Saudi king Abdullah, who is both the Jewish and American science. And here, this slogan says, Wahabiyat al-Saud Yahud, that is, the Saudi royal family is in fact of Jewish origins. Not only are they Jewish, but in fact, they belong to the Jewish tribe that had fought the Prophet Muhammad. And therefore, the moment I define someone as Jewish, I automatically define him as an evil person. Now, another point to look at Iran is that Iran today is a rising regional power. Iran has risen to regional prominence thanks to, I would say, a combination of internal strength and regional developments. Two critical points were, one was the US invasion of Afghanistan, and second one was the ill-fated US invasion to Iraq in 2003. By both invasions, the US removed strategic regional rivals to Iran and enabled in Iran in a way to expand its influence. Another point is that Iran, unlike many other states in the Middle East, is not an artificial state created by Western powers. It has the history and tradition of statehood going back 500 years, and you could say it has higher level of stateness, that is, of state institutions, much more developed compared to its Arab rivals. And I should also say, as a concerned Israeli, that Iran is emerging as a technological and scientific power. Iran has built a very impressive military industry. It produces its own rockets, ballistic rockets, and other sophisticated weapon systems. Now, while Iran has been calling for the elimination of Israel since 1979, in 1992, Iran leader Khamenei offered a peace plan to the Middle East problem. He stated that Iran does not advocate the extermination of the Jews. On the contrary, Iran wants a peaceful solution to the Middle Eastern problem. And the peaceful solution would be that to hold a referendum among the original or authentic, in Persian it is called Asli, the original or authentic inhabitants of Palestine, that is the Arabs, excluding the Jews who came after the so-called Zionist invasion. And these original inhabitants will decide by democratic means, as is practiced in Iran for the past 45 years, they will decide the fate of Palestine. Khamenei was certain that as Muslims, they would decide that Palestine would become a Muslim country. And then he said, once this decision is made, all the Jews will go back home, that is either to Poland, Ukraine, or Morocco, except for a minority that will be allowed to live under Muslim rule. Since Israel has rejected this generous peace offer, and since Israel insists on having a Jewish state, Iran's duty, therefore, is to provide the Arabs and the Palestinians the means to fight and bleed Israel, to bring Israel to its knees until Israel accepts the Iranian peace offer. And basically, this has been the Iranian strategy vis-a-vis Israel since the 1990s. Let me also say, as I mentioned, that Iran perceived itself as a country under siege, as a country threatened mostly by the West. The solution or the answer of Iran to these perceived threats is the Iranians believe to be an defensive policy, but you can call it aggressive defense. That is, the solution should be to be proactive and to fight the enemies of Iran in their own territories. In a way, you can compare Iran here, I would say, to Germany in 1914, on the eve of the First World War, when Germany felt that it was encircled by France on one side and by Russia on the other side, feeling threatened and encircled, Germany opted for launching the war. The same thing here, you can say Iran feels surrounded, feels threatened. The Iran solution is to be proactive, to transfer the war to the enemy's territory. How to do so? To do so using proxies. That is, using militias, usually Shia militias, to fight Iran's enemy, which I'll explain in a second. Now, another point is that Iran perceived itself as destined to lead the Muslim world. Qasem Soleimani, the late commander of the Quds Force, a person who was killed, thankfully, I should say, by the US in 2019, stated that thanks to the 1979 revolution, Iran became the leader of the Muslim world. Former President Rouhani, considered to be a moderate one, stated that Iran's leader, that is Khamenei, is the leader of the entire Muslim world. Whether we say so or we don't say it, that is the fact. Another important person, Claire Code-Younisi, former Minister of Intelligence, explained that Iran is a great civilization that had spread from China to our area here, and more importantly, Iran was born as an empire. And he ended his lecture when he spoke about this, that Iranians must think globally as a global power, but act as Iranians, that is, serving Iranian interests. Again, if you combine the two elements, feeling that they are destined to lead, feeling threatened, and the reaction again is to transform the fight to the enemy's territory. Again, you can see it's also here the growing sense of Iranian empowerment. General Salami, the commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, boasted 3 years ago that in the past, Iran defended its territory from the Karkha River, which separates Iran from Iraq. Today, he said, we have expanded our strategic border. We fight our enemies on the shore of the Mediterranean and in North Africa. Of course, when we fight from North Africa, it is a defensive war, but the war is carried out far away from our borders. Now, again, the way Iran wages is defense or offensive defense is to build a network of Shia organizations, what we call proxies, all led, organized, financed, trained, and I would say that directed by Iran in Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Afghan and Pakistani units, and the Houthis in Yemen, and here I would like to elaborate. By the way, the person who was responsible for directing and organizing the Houthis was Qasem Soleimani. He was a commander of what is called the Quds Force, the Jerusalem Force. That is, he was responsible for directing Iran activities outside Iran, coordinating, directing all these organizations. Now, since 2005, Iran has tried to build, or successfully built, what they call the axis of resistance. That is resistance against the US and against Israel. That is a strategic political bloc composed of Iran, Iraq, Syria under the Assad regime, and Hezbollah in Lebanon, aimed against Israel and against the United States. You should note here that Hamas and Islamic Jihad, that is the Palestinian organizations, are not regarded as an integral part of this axis of resistance. They, I would say, they are allies or annex, but not integral elements of this axis of resistance. The most important organization within this axis of resistance is the Lebanese Hezbollah. Lebanese Hezbollah was established in 1893 with the Israeli invasion to Lebanon, again, ill-fated invasion, was a trigger to process that began before, and Hezbollah has emerged since then as a powerful militia, more powerful than the Lebanese government, and in many ways, by the way, more powerful than many European armies. Hezbollah possesses today something close to 140,000 rockets and missiles aimed against Israel that can reach any point in Israel, from the north all the way to south to Eilat. More than that, Hezbollah has served as Iran's long hand in Iraq. They sent advisors to help the Shia militias in Iraq, in Yemen, and when Syria was engulfed in a civil war and the Assad regime was on the verge of collapse, Hezbollah sent thousands of its troops to fight in Syria. That is, Hezbollah, I would say, is the closest, dearest son of Iran's proxy family. You can see it here, by the way. If you want to see the intimate relations between Hezbollah and Iran, this is a picture of the young Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah in the past 30 years, kisses the hand of Khamenei as an act of submission. For Nasrallah, Hezbollah is not only, Khamenei is not only his political leader. Khamenei is also his religious leader, his religious authority. He regards himself as religiously subordinated to Khamenei. And Nasrallah, among his many speeches, for instance, in one of his speeches, he said, Hezbollah is committed not only to Khamenei's explicit instructions, but you're also committed to his suggestions and views. And whenever our Central Council discusses a certain issue, we avoid action if there is the possibility that Khamenei would be unhappy with it. Nasrallah's deputy, Sheikh Naim Qassem, stated that all strategic decisions made out by Iran are made by Hezbollah are made with Khamenei's explicit approval. On the other side, the Iranian general Yahya Rahim Safavi, former commander of the Iranian Basij mass militia, stated that Lebanese Hezbollah is a soldier of Iran's supreme leader. The point I want to make here is that there is a debate among scholars how independent Hezbollah is. Yes, Hezbollah is a Lebanese organization. Hezbollah is certainly concerned about the fate of Lebanon and the interests of Lebanon. But Hezbollah is loyal to Iran. And when Hezbollah will have to choose, in my view, if they will have a dilemma, they will, on strategic issues, they will opt to obey Iran. Because again, for them, it is a religious duty. Now, they may try to avoid the destruction of Lebanon, but again, they will not waver on their loyalty to Iran. Iraq is a different story. What we have in Iraq is a proliferation of militias since 2003, since the US invaded Iraq, toppled Saddam Hussein. And I should say that until 2003, Saddam Hussein was the #1 murderer in the Middle East. Person who was responsible for the death of more than 500,000 of his own people. Person who used chemical weapons against his own people. But the only semi-positive point about Saddam was that he served as a certain strategic block to Iran or a barrier to Iran. When he was removed, the Shia majority in Iraq took over by democratic means, and they've been ruling Iraq ever since. Since 2003, we could see a rise of Shia militias in Iran, especially after 2013, with the rise of ISIS. Unlike Lebanon, the militias in Iraq suffered from many splits over personal power struggles. I would say also that Iraqi politics are usually more volatile than Lebanese politics. And the Shia militias portray themselves as the Muqawama or resistance against the US and other foreign enemies. Very important, like Hezbollah, today the Shia militias, or the 6 most important Shia militias, are integrated into the Iraqi political system. They have established political parties which now dominate the ruling coalition of Iraq. They receive their salaries and finances from the Iraqi government. At the same time, some of these militias operate as mafia organizations in part of the country, extorting money from Sunnis, from Kurds, and from others in Iran. They've also become, I would say, a fairly corrupt political machine. Now, how loyal are they to Iran? Again, all I need is to quote them. And to give you again one example, a person called Akram al-Ka'bi, a cleric who is the leader of the Shia militias called Harakat Hezbollah al-Mujaba, declared that he would answer to any order from Iran's supreme leader, including, he says, overthrowing the Iraqi government in which he is part of, which is supposed to be loyal to the Iraqi constitution. And again, we would fight any foreign enemy if Iran tells us to fight. And in 2017, for instance, he declared that he was forming what he called the Golan Liberation Brigade, that is in order to fight against Israel. And this militia had tried to establish presence in Syria against Israel. Now, again, the question is, how loyal are they to Iran? Let me give you one simple example. Following the outbreak of the current war with Gaza against Hamas, the Shia militias in Iraq shelled the US bases in northern Iraq. They attacked American targets. All was needed was that Commander Ka'ani from Iran, the current commander of the Quds Force, made a visit from Iran to Iraq. He held talks with the leaders of the Iraqi militias, and within 24 hours, they stopped firing at the American bases. Why? Because Iran did not want to go into direct clash with the US. The other partner in this proxy network are the Houthis in Yemen. They are somewhat different from the other Shia militias because they do not belong to what is called 12er Shiism. That is the trend in the school of Shiism practiced in Iran, Lebanon, Iraq. They belong to a different school called Zaydis. Therefore, they are not religiously subordinate to the Iran supreme leader. More than that, they claim or they boast that not only they are not subordinate to Iran, but in fact, Iranian leader Khomeini had accepted their historical doctrines. Now, the Houthis are extremely anti-Israeli, anti-American. If you look here at the slogans, and they are written in Arabic, and let me translate to you. First slogan is Allahu Akbar, that is God is greatest. Second, Al-Mautu li America, death to America. Al-Maut li Israel, death to Israel. Al-La'na al-Yahud, curse on the Jews. Let me say that there are today less than 200 Jews left in Yemen. And finally, victory to Islam. That is for the Houthis in Yemen, enmity toward the US, enmity toward Israel, and hatred of the Jews are integral, central elements of their ideology. Now, the Houthis are not maybe fully subordinate to Iran. Maybe they regard themselves as junior partners, but they have been supplied, equipped, trained by the Iranians. And in many ways, what they're doing now by shutting down or closing the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, blocking sea transports to Israel, and also, by the way, blocking the Suez Canal, a major international maritime trade route. It is done with coordination with Iran. Now, let me say, and here I'm saying this sadly as an Israeli, tragically, our strategy against Iran has failed. The greatest Israeli blunder, in my view, was to pressure, appeal, solicit the US to withdraw from the 2015 nuclear agreement, what is called the JCPOA. Now, the JCPOA was a bad agreement. It had many faults and many weaknesses. Still, it was preferable to a situation where there was no agreement and there was no obstacle or hindrance to Iran to proceed its efforts to acquire nuclear capability. By withdrawing from this agreement, Iran was basically given a free hand. Now, in addition, Israel tried and carried out a series of sabotage activities against Iran, from installing computer worms to destroy Iranian centrifuges to blowing up some of the Iranian installations. You could call it a series of tactical gains, but eventually strategic failure. Today, Iran is much closer to a nuclear bomb than any time in the past. Today, Iran can produce a nuclear bomb any moment it decides to do so. According to American estimates, Iran can have enough nuclear material for 2 bombs within 3 weeks from a decision. Now, the question is why Iran has not done so yet. Not because of our threats, I would say, largely because Iran believes that if it would acquire nuclear weapons, it would alienate China and Russia, its most important allies, and it would trigger a nuclear race in the Middle East, which it does not want. Another Israeli effort against Iran was to attack the Iranian weapons deliveries to Hezbollah through Syria. And here we achieved partial success. We were able to prevent the consolidation of proxy militias in Syria, but we have not been able to block the weapons delivery to Lebanon. Here I would say our successful efforts in Syria were partially helped by Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who needs the Iranians, depends on the Iranians, but also is afraid of them, and also by Russia, which turned a blind eye to Israeli attacks on these Shia efforts. But as I mentioned, we failed to block weapons deliveries to Lebanon, and unfortunately, Hezbollah has enough weapons to fight not only Israel, but even European countries. Now, the important change in Iran's strategy against Israel and the war against Israel has taken place in 2023, when Iran has made an effort to establish what they call the unity of fronts against Israel. That is to establish a joint front of all its Shia proxies against Israel. It was done in the formation of a joint headquarters in Beirut, in Lebanon, headed by Hezbollah, Palestinian Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Hezbollah is the chairman, but the Iranians are the guides behind the scenes. The Hamas October 7th offensive against Israel was an outcome of strategic cooperation with Iran, when Iran again supplied them with rockets, training, technology, money, and so on. That is, it was strategic coordination, but not tactical. That is, Hamas did not notify the Iranians on the exact day where they would carry out the attack. Since October 7th, Israel has been engaged in a multi-front war waged by Iran and its proxies. Hezbollah has been waging a war of attrition against us in the north for the past 8 months. The Iraqi militias attacked US bases. The Iraqi militias have tried to destabilize Jordan by waging attacks against Israel from Jordanian territory. And the Houthis, again, have been waging attacks against us, launching ballistic rockets against us, launching drones and cruise missiles, and also blocking the Bab-el-Mandeb Straits. Here, I should say, Israel by itself cannot prevent the Houthis, and Israel here received support, crucial support, by the US and by the British, who have been trying to punish the Houthis, unfortunately with limited success. Very importantly, Iran controls the level of violence used by the proxies. As I mentioned, when the Shia militias in Iraq attacked the US, it was Iran who told them to stop. Recently, a journalist of the Guardian newspaper in London, in Britain, not a friend of Israel, visited south of Lebanon. He interviewed Hezbollah officers, and one of them, using the Elias Habib, told him explicitly, they, the Iranians, control every bullet we have. And the Iranians are those who push us to escalate the fight against Israel. Now, until recently, Iran was waging a war against Israel using its proxies. In the past year, we saw a new phase where Iran and Israel are getting closer to a direct confrontation. The turning point was in April 2024, when Israel assassinated 2 senior Iranian officers in Syria, in Beirut, sorry, in a building which the Iranians claimed that was part of the Iranian embassy. By the way, no civilian was killed in this attack. And therefore, the Iran claimed that Israel violated Iranian sovereignty. Israel carried the attack on April 1st. the Iranians retaliated, launching a missile attack against Israel, setting 300 projectiles against Israel. It failed militarily thanks to efforts of the Israeli Air Force, US Air Force, British Air Force, and the Jordanians. But the Iran said, we said explicitly, we formed a red line. We warned the Israelis not to violate Iran's sovereignty anymore. The other attack was when Israel recently assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, the political leader of Hamas in Tehran, which again Iran claimed is a breach of its sovereignty, and Iran pledged to retaliate. And again, we are waiting for the Iran retaliation. The big question is this change of Iran's strategy against Israel, is it simply a response to our actions? Or is the change a result of an Iranian belief in the imminent Israeli collapse? That is the belief that Israel is disintegrating from within. Manifestation of this, and with this I'll finish, is that a clock that was set up in Palestine Square in Tehran, which count downs the days to the imminent collapse of Israel. They set the year 2040 to the date of Israel's destruction. The big question, which I don't have an answer, is this statement on the inevitable or imminent destruction of Israel by 2040 or collapse of Israel, is it merely a vision, a hope, or does it reflect a strategic plan of action? I admit I don't know. I'm not an intelligence officer, I'm a civilian, and therefore I don't know. But what we certainly see is a change in the Iranian policy and strategy against Israel, from indirect war into the threat of a full scale of a direct war against Israel. And I will stop here and leave time for questions if you have any.
Thank you very much, Professor Litvak. It was a fascinating conversation. The first question we have is can you outline any effective responses, either by Israel or by countries other than Israel, to address this situation?
I should say that we should try to de-escalate the direct fight against Iran. Now, we cannot eliminate Iran. We cannot topple the Iran government. I don't believe that revolutions can be carried out from without. I believe that what is necessary against Iran is international action to, I would say, what President Biden said to the Iranians, don't, in the first weeks of the war. I would say thwarting an Iranian intention maybe to intervene in the war, or Hezbollah's intervention. And again, the support Israel got in the recent Iranian attack was very important. Sending a message to Iran that they're not only facing Israel, but they're facing the free world. I think this is essential. In a way to, I would say, to deter Iran from escalation.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience. Can you distinguish between the regime of Iran and its attempts to destabilize Israel and the views of the underlying population? How big a difference are there between the two?
I think there are major differences. There are certainly many Iranians who hate Israel, people who are influenced by the Iran regime, but also many people in Iran who don't care about Israel. They have other problems. They're much more concerned with Iran's severe domestic problems. There are also people who are pro-Israeli because they hate the Iran government. And let me give you an interesting anecdote. In front of every major public building in Iran, you have painted on the ground the Israeli flag and the American flag. So people who enter, let's say, the Tehran University or major banks, they would step on the Israeli or American flag. There's a video clip showing how students make an effort not to step on the Israeli and American flag. They walk on the sidewalk, they walk on the edges, not to step on these two flags, because they hate the regime. And therefore, if the regime is anti-Israeli, they are pro-Israeli. There are certainly many such people in Iran.
Another question from the audience. To what extent or to what extent does Iran's positioning against Israel as a Shiite regime push Israel further into into closer relations with Sunni regimes?
Well, there's certainly shared interest between Israel and many Sunni countries. We have peace with Egypt and Jordan, and the Abraham Accords were instrumental. And certainly, major reason for the formation of the Abraham Accord was joint fear of Iran. The proposal of making a grand bargain, that is to address the war in Gaza, American-Saudi alliance, also bring normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, is of crucial strategic importance for Israel. I think it is a crucial Israel interest to form alliance, friendship with Sunni countries against Iran. These countries are afraid of Iran. They feel intimidated by Iran, and they see Israel as a potential ally against Iran. It's our interest to do so. Of course, there's a certain price to be paid on the Palestinian issue. That is, Israel has to be more flexible on certain issues, on the Palestinian issue, in order to build this alliance against Iran. But I think this alliance is of strategic importance to Israel, strategic priority to Israel.
Another question: what is the total expense for Iran and what is the total expense for Iran for all its proxy activities?
It's difficult to say, but there are estimates that on Syria alone, Iran spent something like $30 billion. Iran has been supporting Hezbollah at approximately, I would say, at least $500 million every year for the past 20 years, probably between $500 million to $1 billion. And I would also say that probably spends similar amounts in Iraq and Yemen. That is basically, you could say Iran spends every year several $billion on its proxies, at a time when the Iranian economy suffers from severe domestic problems.
Another question, actually a follow-on, which is why has Israel actually allowed Hezbollah to get so strong, and is it more effective for Israel to address Hezbollah directly or address Iran directly?
This has been a major debate in Israel. Should we address Iran directly, or should we confront only Hezbollah? The metaphor people use is, should we attack the cat's claws, sorry for my pronunciation, or the tigers itself, that is Iran? The problem is that to wage a preventive war against Hezbollah is not only very costly. Israel cannot wage a preventive war without getting American support. And unfortunately, as we saw, we also need Americans, not only political, diplomatic support, but also maybe supports in weapons. And we never received such support. And in order to fight Hezbollah effectively in Lebanon, you have to conquer all of Lebanon. Then what next? Basically, it's militarily impossible, I would say, to destroy Hezbollah in Lebanon. And unfortunately, the only way we could manage is deter. Right now, we are stuck in a war. Still not a full-scale war of attrition, but there are no easy solutions in the Middle East. There is no panacea, I would say, for Israel to address Lebanon, and certainly wage a war against Iran is too big for us, with all due respect to our power.
Another question. Can you address the change in Iran's relationship with China and Russia and the relevance of that for Israel?
That's a very negative development. Iran and China have become very close. China is Iran's largest consumer of oil. China helps Iran evade American sanctions. China supports Iran diplomatically on every international arena. Russia and Iran have drawn closely militarily. Russia promised to supply Iran with advanced weapon systems, and Iran, surprisingly enough, now provides Russia with drones, and there's increasing tightening military cooperation between Iran and Russia. China had been a friend of Israel, but China has drawn away from Israel. China has been extremely critical at Israel in recent months because they see Israel as too close to the US. Russia has taken a strong anti-Israeli position. And unfortunately, this is not a full-scale alliance between Russia, China, and Iran, but this is certainly a cause of concern. And from Israel's point of view, it's a very negative development. But there's not much we can do about it.
Okay. How are Israel's targeted assassinations affecting hostage negotiations?
I would say, and I'm not sure, and say very skeptical that the recent assassination of Hania was beneficial in any way. And I think that certainly it made the hostage deal more difficult. Let me say, I'm not a pacifist. Sometimes target assassinations are necessary. Sometimes they are, when we killed Muhammad Def, it was great. We killed some senior Hezbollah officers. It's important. That is, I'm not against assassinations if they are beneficial from a strategic point of view. Hania was a politician, evil person. He rejoiced on October 7th when he learned the news that they killed so many Israelis. He calls for Israeli extermination incessantly. Guy is no righteous person, okay? But killing him, I don't think it was beneficial. And it, I think, hindered or made deal much more difficult to achieve.
What is the role of Turkey in all of this as a Sunni country, but somewhat outside of the Gulf Arabic states?
Turkey has become, again, another rival of Israel. I would say Turkey and Iran, what I call it, as rivals and lovers at the same time. Turkey and Iran both see themselves as the potential or leaders of the Middle East. Turkey and Iran compete with each other politically on, let's say, in countries like, or competed with Syria or Iraq. At the same time, Turkey and Iran are economically dependent on each other. The mutual trade between them exceeds $30 billion a year. Turkey has become increasingly hostile at Israel. Erdogan is becoming not only increasingly anti-Israeli, but also anti-Semitic. He's been using anti-Semitic tropes in recent years. The interest lobby that dominates the world, George Soros, the Jew who dominates the world, and he's pro-Hamas. He's been pro-Hamas since early days, and I would say become obsessive against Israel. And he uses, in addition to his genuine feelings, he wants to use this hostility of Israel in order to gain support in the Arab world. So there's a certain competition between Iran and Turkey on the one hand, and some cooperation on the other.
To what extent do you think the growth of anti-Semitism in the Western world since October 7th is in danger of causing Iran to become a more acceptable regime in general?
Of course. First of all, by the way, there are indications and there is some evidence that Iran has been behind the campaign in some of the American campuses. There's now an official Canadian report that says that Iran has been behind the campaign in some Canadian universities. Certainly, when Israel is portrayed as an evil entity and radical Islam is portrayed as a liberating movement against Israel, certainly that helps legitimizes not Iran and also radical organizations. There was an interesting case in UCLA 2 years ago when a Jewish student walked with the Israeli flag. He was beaten. When he walked with ISIS flag, no one even noticed it. So all of a sudden, ISIS became a positive symbol, and Israel is the epitome of evil. Certainly, anti-Semitism helps the radical Islamic organization and helps Iran, no question about it.
Another question. Do you think Israel can eradicate Hamas before the war opens on the Northern Front? I guess probably the answer is no, given what you said so far. But
it's, I would say, impossible to totally eradicate such an organization because it is deeply rooted in Palestinian society and so on. But it is certainly possible and to deal a very severe blow to Hamas. And here I would say it is essential to supplant the military efforts against Hamas with a political movement. That is, with political movement, what is the day after? We have dealt, by the way, Hamas has suffered severely. Hamas has lost, I would say, 60, 70% of its fighting force. And it is essential that when Hamas is beaten militarily, even if it's not totally eradicated, that there is a political alternative to Hamas in Gaza. And here, the proposal of a joint Arab move, Egyptian, Emirati, Saudi backing with a rejuvenated as much as possible, Palestinian Authority, which is again not an angel, it is a very problematic partner, but better than Hamas. It is essential that such thing will take place in order to defeat Hamas. Otherwise, Hamas will regain all its lost assets when the war ends. And eventually the war will end. War is politics by other means. War by itself is insufficient unless it is accompanied by political steps.
So if we assume that an acceptable deal was on the table, do you think now is an optimal time for Israel to finish with the war in the south?
The war will not be finished completely because
Understood.
I don't think Hamas will end the war, but a deal now is, I think, positive, is beneficial. If all the Israeli military commanders say that this is now beneficial, I believe them. It's also essential if we need to face a large, more dangerous threat from the north, and it will be beneficial if we also take the necessary political steps. Establishing a ceasefire in Gaza without any additional political measure will bring Hamas back. And then it will mean strategic failure.
To what extent do economic sanctions have a role to play in this story?
Economic sanctions against whom, sorry?
Against Iran.
The economic sanctions against Iran have been important. Unfortunately, Iran has been receiving help from China and Russia to evade the sanctions. There's also using Iraq as another way to evade sanctions. And unfortunately, I mean, the economic sanctions are harming Iran. The Iran economy is in deep trouble. Iran, the promise of Pezeshkian to make an effort to lift sanctions from Iran was a major reason why he was elected. The reason why Supreme Leader Khamenei allowed Pezeshkian to win the elections in Iran was because Khamenei realized the need to remove some of the sanctions. So the sanctions are painful to Iran. They're not strong enough. They're incapable of destroying Iran, but they are painful to Iran. Unfortunately, they've not been sufficient to, let's say, to prevent Iran from wasting money on its proxies. Without sanctions, Iran would have been much better off. But unfortunately, Iran's found ways to circumvent the sanctions. So by themselves, they're insufficient weapon.
So we have 5 minutes to go. I do want to ask you one question, which is there any reason to be optimistic? We've heard a lot justifiably from you about what a tough situation this is for Israel and how powerful Iran has become. But is there any reason to be optimistic over the next few years?
Well, I would say two things. I think if Israel takes the measures that will enable it to build the alliance with our Sunni countries, then this horrible war will evolve into a strategic victory for Israel. That is, if we are able to establish alliances to whatever extent with Saudis and other Arab countries, this will have tremendous positive strategic implications for Israel. It will serve as a major obstacle for Iran and its proxies against us. So this is one thing. Here, we can do something about it. Now, on the other hand, I would say there are long-term processes which I've not discussed that affect Iran very negatively. I would say it very quickly. Iran suffers from a very severe water shortage, droughts and water shortage, which will threaten Iran economy and Iran society, which will pose strategic threats to Iran's almost, I would say, existence. Iran is facing severe challenge of global warming. Already there are areas in Iran where temperatures in the summer reach over 55 degrees centigrade. Such areas will become uninhabitable within the next few years. That will pose a major threat to Iran. That is and also there are several social processes that take place in Iran which are threatening the regime. That is, in the long run, I think the Iran regime will face existential threats. What we need is perseverance, because I believe that if we act correctly, time will work for us against the Iranians. So I think that in the long run, again, if we act correctly, we will be much better off vis-a-vis Iran than at the present.
Before we wrap up, I guess my last question for you will be, is there anything we haven't asked you that we should have done?
No, there are many questions to be asked, but I think you covered many areas. And
okay.
The only thing that I would say is one question which I will answer is, should Israel, why didn't Israel bomb Iran on the nuclear efforts? I would say bombing Iran or bombing Iranian nuclear facilities would not have been beneficial. So I think this policy, it was not us, but I would say it's been a positive policy by Israel.
Yeah. Just to be clear, in terms of that answer, you're referring to the opportunity to bomb Iran several years ago.
Yes, and I think it was a correct decision not to do so. Yes.
And I think you described the several tactical successes in terms of delaying the nuclear proliferation, but ultimately, I mean, you think you described it as a strategic failure. I mean, perhaps that was.
But I think here again, what will prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons would be Chinese, Russian position, and most importantly, the Iranian fear that the Saudis and the Turks will acquire nuclear weapons. So here, the way to deter Iran is by the Saudis to say to Iran, don't do it. By the way, which is something the Saudis did. This will deter Iran.
Right. So we might just have to live with an Iran 1 week or 2 weeks away from.
Unfortunately, yes, for the time being, yes.
Okay. I think that is a good point to stop. I think this has been fascinating. I apologize to everybody who sent a question in that we didn't get a chance to answer. I did my best to cover the major points, but I really want to thank Professor Litvak for being so generous with his time and his expertise. I think this is, definitely one of the more interesting webinars I've participated in recent years. And I want to thank our friends around the world for joining us today, and for all of you for your ongoing support for Tel Aviv University, including the emergency campaign and the Uniform to University scholarship campaign for student reservists. We pray for the safe return of the hostages and for the safe return of every soldier and for the safety of every citizen of Israel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure.